They handcuffed her in front of the entire crew. No warning, no explanation, just cold steel and silence on the flight deck. Within minutes, 6 destroyers broke formation and encircled the carrier, refusing to answer hails, their weapons systems humming with intent. Who was Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam to command such loyalty and fear? This is not just a story of protocol and power. It's about the quiet strength of one woman and the storm she didn't start but damn well finished. Let us know where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just be even more explosive. Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam moved with a kind of precision that came from years of living in a world where every second counted and every misstep could cost lives. Her strides were purposeful, shoulders squared beneath her uniform, boots clicking against the non-skid surface of the carrier's steel deck. She wasn't the kind of officer who needed to raise her voice. Her presence alone made people straighten up. Officers twice her size gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of something rarer in the military: earned respect. At 39, Alina had the calm edge of someone who had seen too much, spoken too little, and carried it all in silence. The scar above her right collarbone, just beneath where her insignia gleamed, hinted at a history no one dared to ask about. Those who tried were often met with a tight smile and a gentle redirection, like a door softly closing without a sound. She wasn't secretive, she was contained. She adjusted the clipboard under her arm, her other hand tugging her hair into a tighter regulation bun as she made her way past the rows of F-35s secured for early morning flight ops. The carrier, USS Gallant, was humming with life, even though the sun had yet to break the horizon. Every operation ran like clockwork under her watch, and her watch never faltered. "Ensign Braddock," she called out, not slowing her pace. The young man, barely out of the academy, turned so fast he nearly lost his footing. "Yes, ma'am." "Pre-light briefings. I want confirmation. No mistakes this time." "They're all accounted for. Pilots briefed and standing by." Alina nodded once. She didn't offer praise. Not here, not on the deck. It diluted the discipline. But there was a subtle curve to the edge of her lips, and that was enough for Braddock to feel 10 feet tall. She scanned the rest of the flight line, ticking off aircraft readiness, fuel levels, weapons checks. It was all routine. And yet, something felt off this morning. Not in the operations, in the air. In the way a few sailors lingered just a beat too long in their tasks, their eyes darting between her and the carrier's island tower. Conversation seemed shorter, movements sharper. She chalked it up to nerves. The Gallant was participating in multinational drills off contested waters. Everyone was on edge. Mistakes were not tolerated, and expectations were bone-crushingly high. Till Alina was about to wave over one of the deck chiefs when she caught a flicker of movement near the catwalk. 2 figures emerged from the fog, both in Marine Corps fatigues, both wearing MP armbands. Their posture told her everything. Locked shoulders, stiff jaws, eyes fixed. They were coming for her. She remained rooted, watching them approach with the stillness of someone used to standing in doorways as bullets zipped by. Her grip on the clipboard didn't tighten. Her breath didn't change. Only her jaw shifted slightly as she squared herself toward them. "Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam?" the taller MP asked, though they both knew it was rhetorical. "Yes, you're to come with us, ma'am." Her brow arched just slightly. "On whose authority?" The MP didn't flinch. "Captain Keating's orders." And there it was, the first surprise. Captain Jonathan Keating had never questioned her decisions publicly, never intervened in her domain on the flight deck. Whatever this was, it wasn't coming from protocol. It was personal. Or political. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Braddock stiffen behind her, his hand twitching at his side. Good instincts. Bad timing. The PA system cracked to life, its feedback screeching before the captain's voice rang out. flat and clinical. "Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam, you are ordered to stand down from flight operations and accompany the MPs for immediate reassignment." Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The rhythm of the deck stuttered, then stopped. Even the machinery seemed to hum quieter, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Alina didn't move. "May I ask the reason for this reassignment?" she said, her voice steady, crisp. The MPs said nothing. The taller one stepped forward and produced a pair of handcuffs. That was the second surprise. Alina's eyes flicked to the cuffs, then back to the man. For a moment, neither moved. The fog thickened between them. Someone, somewhere, dropped a wrench. It clanged once against the deck and bounced into silence. Braddock took a step forward. "Stand down, Ensign," she said, without turning. He froze. She slowly handed the clipboard to him, her fingers lingering for just a second, enough to pass something. A note? A data chip? No one saw. It was that fast. Then, in one fluid motion, she turned, placed her hands behind her back, and let the cuffs close around her wrists. The metal clicked loud in the silence, echoing across the ship like a gunshot in a chapel. The MPs flanked her, and together they moved toward the island tower, disappearing into the mist that had started to burn away with the rising light. For a long moment, no one moved. No orders were shouted. No planes were launched. The deck, normally a thunderstorm of motion, had frozen, held hostage by the unanswered question that now haunted every mind on board. What did she do? Below deck, Captain Keating watched the entire scene unfold on the command monitors, his face unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, as the cameras followed Alina's march below deck. Commander Eli Rhodes, watching from the adjacent destroyer, USS Hawthorne, stood stiffly on his bridge. His jaw tightened as he leaned forward and muttered under his breath. They actually did it. Behind him, someone whispered, "Sir, should we notify Admiral Maddox?" Rhodes didn't. "Start warming the railguns," he said, "and prep secure comms. No transmissions yet, just be ready." Across the horizon, 5 other destroyers from Task Force Sentinel began changing course, pivoting slowly and silently toward the Gallant. No orders, no explanations. Not yet. Just a quiet shift in the water, as if something ancient and dangerous had begun to stir. And above them all, in a room locked behind 3 levels of security clearance, Alina Northam sat in handcuffs, staring straight ahead. Not angry, not afraid, just waiting. The room was colder than she remembered. Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the table, still cuffed. The metal bit into her skin where it had been too tight for too long, but she didn't ask them to loosen it. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Across from her sat a junior legal officer with a voice 2 octaves too high for the gravity of the situation. She hadn't given her name. Alina hadn't asked. There was no mirror in the interrogation room, no camera that she could see, though she was sure they were watching. Through the vents, the walls, or some naval intelligence trick she wasn't cleared for. The Gallant was a modern war machine, but even modernity left shadows. And it was in those shadows that this had begun. She knew the procedure. If this had been a formal arrest under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, there would have been documentation, charges, a legal representative, a clear chain of events. Instead, they'd marched her down into the bowels of the ship like a threat that had to be buried fast and deep. "Do you know why you're here?" the junior officer asked. Alina didn't answer. "You were advised to remain silent." "That's your right. But this can go faster if you help us understand your role." Feeling still silence. The officer shifted awkwardly in her seat, clearly unused to stone-faced officers of Alina's caliber. She flipped through the thin folder in front of her. It wasn't much. A printout. One blurry satellite photo, a redacted transcript. That told Alina one thing: they didn't have what they needed to make this stick. Not yet. Upstairs, the silence had fractured. Word of her arrest spread like fire in dry timber. Sailors whispered behind closed hatches. Marines exchanged looks at Chow. Petty officers who had worked under her gave each other cautious nods, unspoken agreements passing between them. Alina Northam wasn't just respected. She was anchored into the steel of the gallant. Removing her without explanation was like cutting out part of the ship's keel. Ensign Braddock had felt it first, after she'd handed him the clipboard and something else tucked within. He hadn't dared look until hours later. When he did, locked alone in the comms office, where he thought no one would interrupt him, he found a microdata wafer pressed between the pages. Slender, nearly weightless. It glowed with encrypted information the moment he slotted it into the portable terminal. Access denied. Clearance level Maddox 6. He blinked. Admiral Cynthia Maddox? There were only 3 people in the entire fleet cleared at that level, and Braddock was definitely not one of them. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. Whatever Alina had given him wasn't just sensitive, it was nuclear. He didn't know what to do, not yet, but he knew who might. Below deck, Sergeant Darren Holt leaned against a bulkhead just outside the brig, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd been the one to place the cuffs on her. Protocol. Duty. Orders. But it didn't sit right. Holt had been with the military police for 12 years. He'd dragged officers off flight decks before, usually drunk, sometimes belligerent, once even violent. But Alina Northam hadn't flinched, hadn't questioned, just turned and offered her wrists like she was brushing dust off her sleeves. She didn't act like someone caught. She acted like someone giving them a chance to fix their mistake before it was too late. And now, he muttered to himself. The deck was humming with tension. Pilots, who usually joked before sorties, sat quietly in the ready room, eyes flicking toward the intercom, waiting for news. One chief petty officer with 18 years under her belt said aloud what many were thinking. If they can take her down like that, what chance do the rest of us have? Captain Keating remained on the bridge, flanked by his inner circle, a storm of reports and messages flowing through his command terminal. His face was pale, hands twitchy. He wasn't the kind of man built for confrontation. He followed rules because they protected him. But this wasn't rules. This was a directive he couldn't trace, a command that had come through encrypted orders with no signature. He had obeyed. But the moment the 6 destroyers started to shift course, he began to sweat. From his viewport, Keating could see their silhouettes in the distance. Quiet, menacing, holding formation just outside missile range. They hadn't radioed, hadn't answered hails, just appeared. Their presence alone said what no open threat could. We're watching. On the USS Hawthorne, Commander Eli Rhodes finally stopped pacing. His jaw was locked. He'd served with Alina 10 years ago during the Somali Strait interdictions. She'd pulled him out of a burning ship compartment when an enemy mine had buckled their hull. 3 sailors had died that day. Eli lived because Alina had ignored orders and gone back in. So when he saw the arrest from his command feed, he didn't just see a breach of justice. He saw betrayal. "Send the ping," he told his comms officer. "Sir, that's a direct challenge." "Send it." A single burst transmission was fired toward the gallant. One encrypted line. "Admiral Maddox requests immediate secure link, non-negotiable." Back on the gallant, Keating watched the notification blink red. The name hit him like a fist to the chest. Admiral Maddox didn't ask for favors. She summoned storms. Down in the brig, Alina looked up suddenly, just slightly. Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling, as if hearing something the others couldn't. And in that instant, Sergeant Holt felt a chill run down his spine. Something had shifted. "Commander Northam," the junior officer said again, her voice rising a bit, "if you continue to withhold cooperation, we'll be forced to escalate this." Alina turned her head slowly. Her voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "You think I'm the threat, but I was the one keeping it contained." The officer blinked, confused. Alina leaned forward just an inch, her cuffs scraping metal. "You want to know what this is about? Ask your captain why the satellite logs from last week's surveillance run were deleted. Ask him who authorized an unscheduled civilian vessel approach within strike range. Ask him where he was the night the comms server went down." The room fell still. And just like that, the junior officer realized she was in way over her head. Back in the comms room, Ensign Braddock clutched the wafer tightly. His terminal had begun blinking with a new directive. Link established. Admiral Maddox. His eyes widened. Alina hadn't been trying to escape. She'd been waiting for reinforcements. And they were already here. The first destroyer to appear had been written off as coincidence. Second, maybe, reinforcement. By the third, every seasoned officer on the Gallant knew something was off-screen. When the fourth, fifth, and sixth vessels slowly adjusted their course and drew into a perfect hexagonal perimeter around the carrier, no one was pretending anymore. This wasn't protocol, it was a message. On the bridge, Captain Keating stood frozen behind the tactical display, watching the blue blips clustered tighter around his ship like closing jaws. No shots fired, no hails received, not even a change in their IFF codes. Just a silent steel noose, tightening with every nautical mile. "Range to Darrow, sir?" asked Lieutenant Mercer, voice tight. Keating blinked. 3 clicks and holding. "They haven't crossed the buffer line yet, but if they advance any further—" "I know where the line is, Lieutenant." Mercer swallowed hard and looked away. The Darrow, the Whitmore, the Hawthorne, the Juno, the Radcliffe, and the Benson. All part of Task Force Sentinel, all heavy hitters. All now slowly, quietly forming an armed perimeter with the Gallant at its center. A fortress of warships with weapons primed and no visible aggression, yet every movement brimming with controlled menace. Keating turned to his comms officer. "Any luck?" "No, sir. They're receiving our transmissions, but aren't acknowledging. They're dark, completely dark." He paced in a tight circle, sweat gathering at his temple. He hadn't authorized this. Hell, he hadn't even been briefed that Sentinel was in the area. The official drill logs said they were 200 miles south, conducting live fire exercises. So what the hell were they doing here? It wasn't a blockade. It was protection. Below, in the brig, Alina sat still, calm, eyes closed. She hadn't spoken in nearly 20 minutes. No pacing, no questions, just stillness. Like she could feel the formation tightening above her. Sergeant Holt stood near the hatch, one foot planted back against the bulkhead, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken either, not since she asked about the surveillance logs. He didn't need to. She'd said enough in those 3 sentences to shake him to the core. "Do you believe in ghosts, Sergeant?" she asked suddenly, eyes still closed. He raised an eyebrow. "Beg your pardon?" "I'm not talking about the dead. I mean the kind that drift between the cracks of command chains, the kind that exist on paper only long enough to cause damage, then vanish with the next server sweep." Holt didn't answer, but his throat worked. "There's something buried deep in naval intel, something rotten. I caught a glimpse of it. That's why I'm here, not because of what I did, but because of what I know." She finally opened her eyes, locking onto him. There was no hatred in them, no panic, just certainty. "They're not here to arrest me, Sergeant. They're here to erase me." Holt stood straighter. "Then why haven't they done it?" She looked toward the ceiling again. "Because they weren't expecting witnesses." Up on the Hawthorne, Commander Eli Rhodes monitored the carrier's movements with barely veiled tension. His bridge crew worked in silence, everyone on edge. The weapons officer stood by, systems green but dormant, waiting for an order they all hoped wouldn't come. "Any update from the Admiral?" Rhodes asked. "Still waiting on clearance to push the data. She's holding until the Gallant makes a move." Rhodes nodded slowly. "Which they won't, not yet. Keating's a coward, not an idiot." "Sir," his XO interjected, "are we really doing this? Encircling one of our own?" Rhodes turned. "You served with Northam." "No, sir. Just heard of her." "Then you don't understand. If she says something's wrong in our house, something's wrong. Period." The XO hesitated. "But this formation, this is the kind of move that sparks court-martials." Rhodes stepped forward, leaning close enough for only the XO to hear. "There are things worse than court-martials?" Back on the Gallant, Ensign Braddock sat alone in the auxiliary comms bay, a secure link open on his screen. The transmission was still blinking. "Admiral Maddoc's live feed stand by." He kept glancing at the door, nervous sweat collecting at the base of his neck. What if someone walked in? What if they saw the data wafer? He knew he should report it. Chain of command. But every instinct screamed that the chain was compromised. Suddenly the screen shifted. A secure video feed opened, revealing the sharp, weathered face of Admiral Cynthia Maddox. Her uniform bore no nameplate, and her eyes carried the weight of wars that had never made the news. "Ensign Braddock," she said without introduction. He snapped to attention, even though she couldn't see below the camera line. "Ma'am." "Yes, ma'am." "You have it?" "Yes, ma'am, I haven't opened it, not cleared." "You're not supposed to be. But you're also the only one I can trust on that ship." He swallowed. "Why me?" "Because Alina Northam chose you." He hesitated, glancing again at the door. "Ma'am, I need to know what's happening. Why are the destroyers here? Why is she being held?" Admiral Maddox leaned forward, her face hardening. "It's because she uncovered something inside naval intelligence. A Black Ops pipeline using carrier-side logistics to move untraceable assets, weapons, tech, maybe even personnel. She intercepted a transmission from a civilian freighter 2 nights ago. She flagged it, logged it, filed it properly. And then her system access was revoked. Within hours, Captain Keating received sealed orders and a list of justifications to detain her. None of it came from my office. None of it came from JAG. So where did it come from?" Maddox's jaw tightened. "That's the question you and I are going to answer." He nodded, heart hammering. "Download the contents from the wafer onto a drive. Hand it to no one. You bring it to me personally when the time comes." "Yes, ma'am." She paused. "And Braddock? If anything happens to her before I get there." Her voice didn't rise, but the cold finality in it made him flinch. "I will consider it an act of war." The screen went dark. On the bridge, Keating paced again, finally snapping, "Get me Admiral Maddox on direct line." His comms officer looked pale. "Sir, she's not responding. Her flagship is maintaining blackout protocol. She can't just blockade my carrier without consequence." "She already has, sir." Keating slammed his fist against the table. For a moment no one moved. Then, from behind, a low voice spoke. "Sir, we have incoming message from CENTCOM, top-line clearance." He turned sharply. "Put it through." The screen lit up. But it wasn't from CENTCOM, not really. It was marked Code Sable Waif, and it was addressed not to Keating, but to Alina Northam. Somewhere deep in the ship, as the walls seemed to tremble with the tension of steel surrounding steel, Alina closed her eyes again, just briefly. Then she smiled, very faintly. Sergeant Darren Holt couldn't shake it. The words Alina Northam had said in that cold gray room weren't just lingering, they were spreading, crawling under his skin, threading through every quiet moment since he'd locked her away. "You think I'm the threat. I was the one keeping it contained. He stood outside the brig again, arms folded, but this time his stance wasn't about protocol. It was hesitation, reflection, maybe even guilt. He wasn't used to second-guessing his orders. In the Marines, doubt could kill faster than enemy fire. But right now, doubt felt like the only thing keeping him sane. Inside, Alina hadn't moved. She sat upright, hands still cuffed, gaze calm and distant. There was no urgency in her expression, no signs of collapse. If anything, she looked more at ease than when she was on the flight deck, like this was familiar territory, like she'd been here before. Holt had seen insurgents show less composure. He glanced down at his compad. No new orders, no confirmation, just static, and still no formal charges. That alone was a red flag. He reached for the hatch. His hand hovered, then pulled away. He wasn't ready yet. Up above, Ensign Tyler Braddock was no longer pacing. He was moving with purpose now, boots echoing through the lower deck corridors as he made his way toward the secure message core. The data wafer was now inside a classified drive tucked into a Velcro pouch under his blouse. He could feel its weight. Not physical, but moral. Consequential. He passed 2 lieutenants on their way to the CIC. They barely acknowledged him. That was good. Invisibility suited his mission. Maddox had given him an impossible task, but impossibility was something Alina Northam specialized in, and she had chosen him. He reached the security office. 2 junior techs sat at their terminals, half watching system feeds, half scrolling their handhelds. Neither looked up. Braddock tapped the override panel. Ensign Braddock, clearance Echo 39, request Level 4 access. The techs blinked, suddenly very awake. Level 4? What the hell for? The data integrity check, priority. Who signed off on? Admiral Maddox. That shut them up. The lock hissed. The inner chamber opened. Braddock stepped inside, breath tightening in his chest. He'd never been in this room. Hell, he wasn't even supposed to know it existed, but Northam had passed him the access key embedded in her clipboard's edge. A silent message. This is the line. Cross it. He slid the drive into the terminal. The screen lit green. Secure uplink established, Sable Royth authorized. He uploaded the file. Then he waited. On the other side of the ocean, Admiral Cynthia Maddox watched the packet arrive in silence. She stood alone in her command chamber aboard the USS Nightward, her eyes locked on the decrypted file streaming across her monitor. Lines of intercepted transmissions, tampered logistics records, satellite images showing ghost vessels docking with civilian freighters under false hull codes. There it was. The network Alina had discovered. A black-threaded operation spooling through the Pacific. Arms, intelligence, and human trafficking funneled under the Navy's own nose. Hidden by doctored manifests, shielded by off-the-books clearance levels. All of it protected by someone powerful enough to bypass oversight and ambitious enough to erase the only officer who could stop it. Maddox's fingers clenched into fists. This wasn't just corruption. This was war. She tapped her Commander Rhodes. Ma'am, advance the line. Bring the Hawthorne to visual contact range. I want our hull reflected in the gallant's windows. Yes, ma'am. And tell Keating. She paused, then smiled coldly. He has 5 minutes to open that brig before I do it myself. Aboard the Hawthorne, Eli Rhodes issued the order. The destroyer adjusted course. Slowly, deliberately, it broke formation and drifted closer, angling its bow toward the gallant's command tower. The predator not stalking, but watching. On the gallant's bridge, the mood changed the moment the Hawthorne filled the forward display. Its hull was close enough now that even enlisted sailors could read the markings without binoculars. The implied threat was clear. Captain Keating stepped back from the command station, face pale. His officers were looking at him now, not just for orders, but for answers. "Sir," said Lieutenant Mercer, voice flat, "what's the play?" Keating didn't answer. The comms terminal blinked. Incoming transmission. Admiral Cynthia Madnox. He stared at it like it might explode. No encryption, no delay. She was done hiding. He tapped it open. Her face appeared on screen, unflinching. "Captain Keating, you will release Lieutenant Commander Northam immediately." He swallowed. "On what grounds?" Her voice was quiet and lethal. "On the grounds that if you don't, I will relieve you of command, issue Article 133 for unlawful confinement, and have you flown off my ocean in handcuffs by sundown." The bridge fell silent. Keating straightened. "You don't have jurisdiction. I have truth. And 6 destroyers prepared to act if you choose the wrong side of it." Keating faltered. "She's compromised sensitive data. You don't know what she's involved in." "I know exactly what she's involved in," Maddox snapped. "Because she sent it to me. Because you didn't have the clearance to see it. And because you were too busy protecting your career to ask the right damn questions." He blinked. Maddox leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You still have time to do the right thing, Jonathan. Don't waste it." The screen went black. Holt stood outside the brig for the 3rd time in as many hours, his hand on the hatch again. This time, he pushed it open. Alina looked up. "I assume she called," she said flatly. "I've recalled feeling anxious. My wife just said to me she's in great. I think she's checking in. Usually? There's so much bias against mental health. And depression itself is depressed? Now? I hope you guys have a good..." I understood. "I hope it appears like no one is listening. I've been trying to figure that out too. I look at people, I feel things, but my heart is misanticipated. I hope..." Did he cave? Not yet. She nodded once. "And there's still a chance." Holt stepped into the room. "What's on that drive?" Alina looked at him carefully. "Enough to sink careers, some of them wearing stars." He exhaled slowly. "So why not go public? Leak it. Blow the whole thing wide open." She leaned back. "Because if we don't root it out the right way, the disease grows back. Worse. They'll bury it deeper next time." Holt considered her for a long moment. "You know they'll come for you, even after this." "I know," she said. And then, almost imperceptibly, "But I won't be alone." Moments later, the brig door buzzed. Captain Keating stood outside, 2 junior officers behind him. His posture was stiff, jaw clenched, but the hand that held the release order trembled. Alina didn't say a word as he stepped in and set the cuffs free. He held her eyes a beat longer than necessary. "Effective immediately, you are reinstated to active duty pending full inquiry." She rose to her feet. "We accept." She stepped past him, head held high, as if the hours in that room had only sharpened her. The steel doors of the brig closed behind her, and as she moved down the corridor, flanked now, not by guards, but by silence, every sailor who passed her stood a little taller. The loyalty line had been drawn, and Alina Northam had just walked across it. The first thing Alina did when she stepped back onto the flight deck was breathe. Not a deep theatrical inhale, not a dramatic pause for effect, just a steady, quiet breath, as if reclaiming her place, one molecule of air at a time. The morning mist had lifted, but the tension on the deck had only grown heavier in her absence. Eyes followed her from every direction. Some looked away quickly when she glanced back, others nodded, barely perceptible gestures, but enough to say, "We saw, we remember." She walked like someone who'd never been gone. Her hair was already retied, uniform squared, voice calm when she spoke to the deck chief. "Tell the pilots to stand by for revised launch windows. We may have an updated op tempo in the next hour." "Yes, ma'am." The deck chief didn't ask. He didn't blink. He just turned and barked the order like it was any other day. That was the gift Alina gave to those around her, the sense that, no matter the chaos, they still lived in a world with rules, rhythm, and reason. Inside the Combat Information Center, Captain Keating was unraveling. He stood with one hand gripping the back of his chair, the other tapping a pencil against the console with erratic rhythm. He'd received no further transmission from Maddox since she'd issued her ultimatum. No direct follow-up, no detailed explanation, just the silent weight of her destroyers outside the portholes, and the image of his reinstated XO walking freely through the ship he no longer fully commanded. "Sir," said Lieutenant Mercer, approaching slowly, "you might want to see this." Keating turned toward the main display. The Hawthorne had moved again, closer this time, just enough for its radar signature to ping aggressively against their systems. "Are they locking onto us?" Keating asked. "Negative. Still passive. But they're not exactly hiding." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "What the hell is Maddox doing?" Mercer didn't respond. The question wasn't meant for him anyway. "I want a secure call routed through D.C., Keating snapped, "not local command. I want someone in the Pentagon who can override this madness." "Yes, sir." But Mercer didn't move. "Down, Lieutenant." "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think D.C. is going to overrule Admiral Maddox. Not today." Keating's face flushed. "And why is that?" "Because if even half of what's in that data file is real, then we're not talking about chain of command violations anymore. We're talking about war crimes." Keating's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Braddock was already waiting outside the CIC. He'd come straight from the secure core, the empty drive tucked in his inner pocket. When Alina stepped off the flight deck, he was already there, standing quietly at attention in the shadow of the tower. "I uploaded it," he said. "Into Maddox?" He nodded. "She said it confirms everything." Alina took a moment, studying him. "You did well." "I didn't do it for praise, ma'am." "I know." They walked together side by side up the central corridor toward the command briefing room. It was the same space where she had once led joint ops during a high-seas hostage recovery, the kind of mission that got quietly tucked into someone else's promotion speech. The room was empty now, dimly lit, the projection map still showing a weather pattern over the South China Sea. Alina keyed the wall panel and locked the hatch behind them. Then she turned to Braddock. "Show me." He hesitated only a second before pulling out the second copy of the drive. He placed it on the table and slid it forward. Alina activated the embedded screen. Lines of code flickered. Images. Emails. Schedules of supply transfers that didn't match official manifest records. And then, the footage. Aerial drone images of a civilian freighter, no flag, no visible ID markings, docking under cover of night with a naval support vessel assigned to a separate carrier group, one flagged as inactive. The cargo moving between them was tightly crated, no labels, no tracking. But it was the timestamp that made Alina's heart slow. 48 hours before the data server crash that had wiped a month's worth of Gallant's logistics backups. There it was. The ghost operation she'd stumbled onto. Someone was using classified fleet rotations to move illegal materials across conflict zones, maybe even people. And when she reported the breach, they tried to erase her instead. She leaned back, fingers templed together. Who else knows? Only Admiral Maddox, Commander Rhodes, maybe. And now, me. Alina nodded once. "You're not just a bystander anymore, Ensign." "I figured." She stood and walked to the panel again, opening a secure comm line. "Rhodes, North Am." The reply came almost instantly. "I see you've been reinstated." You knew she'd break him. Keating folds under pressure. Always has. Alina's voice dropped. "We have the evidence." "Then it's time. Are your ships ready?" Rhodes didn't hesitate. "We've had our weapons cold for 2 hours. One more stunt from Gallant's command, and I won't wait for permission." Alina turned back to the table, the glow of the data still playing against the metal. "We're gonna need to make this public. Controlled release, full congressional oversight. You sure? If we don't, it all gets buried again. We're not just cleaning house, Eli. We're gutting the foundation." Rhodes was quiet for a long beat. Then, "Let's rip it out." The connection cut. As Alina turned to leave, Braddock cleared his throat. "Ma'am, what happens next?" She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes didn't seem so distant. They were tired. Human. "Next," she said, "we give the Navy something it hasn't had in a long time." He waited. Truth. Elsewhere on the ship, the ripple effects had begun to show. Word spread fast that Alina Northam was not only reinstated, but had been granted unrestricted access to the carrier's entire systems infrastructure. She was walking freely again, now flanked by 2 senior officers from the Radcliffe, both appointed directly by Maddox as fleet liaisons. Keating's authority was unraveling. His inner circle had thinned. Mercer had already requested reassignment to the Hawthorne. His XO had turned in her badge, citing operational compromise. And now, worst of all, an incoming fleet-wide broadcast from Admiral Maddox was scheduled in under an hour. He could feel the power slipping from his hands, not through mutiny, but through legitimacy. Alina had it. He didn't. In the ready room, pilots cleaned gear and murmured about tribunal rumors. In the engine bays, technicians began quietly replacing outdated security badges. In the mess, sailors whispered stories of the destroyers appearing from the mist, like guardians from an old naval legend. And as the hour closed in, every screen aboard the Gallant blinked to life, Admiral Maddox's face filling them all. The broadcast hadn't even begun, but the silence that followed its opening chime was deafening. Alina stood alone near the flight deck rail, wind tugging gently at her sleeves. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just waited. Because justice wasn't a victory. It was a responsibility, and it had finally arrived. The official broadcast began exactly at 900 hours. Across the USS Gallant and mirrored on every destroyer encircling her, Admiral Cynthia Maddox's voice echoed through bulkheads, over mess halls, and into the CIC like a tide finally breaking loose. She stood framed by the seal of the Navy behind her, her shoulders squared, expression firm but not angry, the kind of calm that followed a storm and preceded resolution. "This morning," she began, "a secure operation was authorized to contain an internal breach in our Naval Intelligence Command, one that involved the illegal movement of black classified weapons and unauthorized assets through our own supply lines." Her words fell like anchors. "Not explosive, but inescapable," she continued. "This breach was flagged by Lieutenant Commander Alina Northam. Her report was accurate, her protocol flawless. Her detainment aboard the Gallant was unauthorized and has now been fully overturned." It was a pause. Not for effect, for emphasis, for memory. For those who aided in her silence, investigations are underway. For those who stood with her, you've upheld the core principles of this uniform: integrity before image, courage over convenience. In the CIC, Keating watched the broadcast in silence. His hands were still. His face had gone blank. The officers around him didn't speak. They didn't need to. The verdict had arrived. The curtain had fallen. He turned away from the screen and removed his cap. Later that afternoon, under the open sky on the flight deck, A ceremony was called, impromptu, informal, but no less powerful. Sailors lined the edges of the deck. Officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their ribbons catching sunlight. The destroyers had eased off into a looser perimeter, no longer pressed close, but remaining nearby. Not out of suspicion now, but solidarity. Admiral Maddox arrived via chopper, boots touching the deck like a returning sentinel. She didn't bring staff, just herself. Alina Northam stood waiting, uniform pristine, hands behind her back, chin lifted as Maddox approached. They didn't salute. They embraced, briefly, tightly, as two soldiers who had carried the same burdens, if on different paths. Maddox stepped back, her voice lower than before. "You did it right." "I did what I had to," Alina said. "And you gave them something to believe in, again." Alina didn't answer, but her eyes softened. Maddox turned to the gathered crew. "This isn't a ceremony," she said. "This is a reckoning. Not for punishment, but for perspective. Because when systems fail, when silence becomes easier than truth, it takes one voice, one soul, to remind us who we are." She stepped aside and nodded to Alina. The deck quieted even more, if that was possible. Alina didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need one. She looked across the sea of faces and simply said, "I didn't act alone. I was never alone. You stood with me when it mattered. Some of you quietly, some of you at great risk. But you stood. And that's how we begin again." A pause. Then, with the kind of gravity only truth can carry, "This isn't about clearing my name. This is about protecting the next sailor who tries to do the right thing, and the next, until silence has nowhere left to hide." She stepped back. No applause followed. Instead, the crew stood straighter, the kind of stillness that speaks more than sound ever could. That night, the destroyers peeled off one by one, heading back to their patrol lines, their presence no longer necessary. The shadow around the gallant had lifted. The weight on her steel ribs eased. Repairs that had been stalled resumed, maintenance logs cleared, but something deeper than machinery had changed. Trust had returned. Captain Keating was relieved of command the following morning. The announcement came without drama, just a courier from command with a sealed envelope and a replacement officer boarding via chopper. Keating didn't argue. He packed his things in silence and left his office without fanfare. His command had ended, not with scandal, but with consequence. Alina watched his departure from the catwalk above the hangar bay. Radek stood beside her. "You think he knew?" he asked. "Parts of it," she said. "Enough to justify his fear, not enough to excuse his choice." Radek nodded slowly. "You ever think it would get this far?" She exhaled through her nose. "I thought I'd get buried, forgotten. But you weren't." "No," she said. "I wasn't." For a long moment, they just stood there, watching the distant line of ocean where the sun was beginning to burn a path across the water. "Ensign," she said suddenly. "Yes, ma'am?" "Put in a request for reassignment." He blinked. "Ma'am?" "To my team. Intel Division. You've earned it." He smiled before he could help it. "Excellent." "I'd be honored." That night, a quiet reception was held in the wardroom. Nothing official, just off-duty officers, some chiefs, a handful of enlisted. Someone found an old Bluetooth speaker and played Fleetwood Mac over a tray of cold mac and cheese and overcooked fish. Laughter started to return in pieces. Jokes flowed again. Someone even tried to toast with black coffee because the rum was still banned, and got a standing laugh when they called it Navy champagne. Alina sat near the back, watching it all. Not separate, not above, just present. Holt approached with 2 mugs in hand, one of which he offered wordlessly. She accepted it, sipping quietly. "You were right," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "About ghosts. They're real." "Yeah," he said, "but so are people like you." She gave him a tired smile. "You sticking around?" he asked. "For a while. And after that?" She looked out at the sea through the narrow porthole. The stars had come out over the water, scattered and crisp. "Wherever I'm needed," she said. He nodded and left her in peace. Near midnight, the Gallant drifted quietly under the stars, no longer surrounded by warships, but by calm. Alina stood once more on the flight deck, alone now, the wind playing at her sleeves, her eyes on the horizon. She had been arrested, silenced, underestimated, but not broken. What had begun as a quiet whisper of injustice had risen into a reckoning that would ripple through the Navy for years to come. She wasn't the hero they'd expected. She was something rarer, the one who stayed standing. And as the ocean stretched ahead, endless and open, so did the truth. No longer hiding in shadows, but carried forward in the wake of 6 ships that had dared to turn toward one of their own. The fleet had spoken, and in doing so made sure the name Alina Northam would never be forgotten.